Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 11th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we've just got 6 stake races to look at. One from Keeneland, the feature race there on Saturday, the Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup. A pretty interesting field of 3-year-old fillies contesting that. Then we'll head up to Canada to look at the Canadian International card, the future race being the Canadian International, along with the EP Taylor for the fillies and mares and the sprinters going into the Arctic. And then we'll close it out with a couple stakes from Belmont Park on Saturday, the Sands Point and the Floral Park. The Breeders' Cup preps are pretty much over at this point. I don't think that any of these races are going to produce any Breeders' Cup starters, so we get a little bit of a breather over the next couple weeks before we really gear up for those Breeders' Cup races towards the end of the month. Craig, how are you doing? Recovered from the past couple weeks of intense stakes action?
Yeah, I have. Looking forward to a little easier week this week. It's certainly been an easier week with figure making and all that. These are always some pretty good Woodbine races. Every once in a blue moon, a horse from there will run in the Breeders' Cup, but I don't think any of them have ever done particularly well off the top of my head. So while the Breeders' Cup pretty much is set, I think we do have some interesting races to talk about. We have a ton of Euro shippers, which is kind of right up our alley at TimeformUS with the Timeform ratings and the notes that we get. So looking forward to this.
Yeah, a lot of the horses in these Woodbine races were actually pretty unfamiliar to me, so I actually had to do a bit of work on them looking up some of these races, but we'll get to those in a second. We're going to begin with the race from Keeneland, the Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup, and most of these horses we're pretty familiar with. We've been seeing them in a lot of these stakes races for the 3-year-old fillies, both in Kentucky and in New York. The likely favorite in this race is going to be Cambier Park. Chad Brown's got a trio of strong contenders in this race. I think they all have shots to win. But Cambier Park is coming off that Grade 1 victory in the Del Mar Oaks. Wasn't facing the toughest field that day, but she did pick up that Grade 1 victory. And she was third prior to that in the Belmont Oaks behind Concrete Rose, who was the clear leader of this division before she got injured. The pace situation in this race, I think, is something you have to discuss because it's one of these no speed labels in the pace projector. Cambier Park is one of those that's predicted to be up close to the pace, but I think it's just a total guessing game as to who's going to set the pace in this race.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think this is a race where we really have any idea. It's not one where I would argue with the pace projector because looking at it, I can't figure out who's going to be up there. I do think a horse like Cafe Americano, who's one of the Chad Brown trained horses you mentioned, is probably going to be at a bit of a disadvantage just because of this pace. She comes out of winning the Grade 3 Pucker Up. She didn't need a great setup. She just had a solid pace there. So maybe she'll be able to overcome it. And one of the points of this no pace label is we used to label these as horses on or near the early lead. And we pretty much found that that's not always the case here. Normally, it still sets up for horses that like to come from a little off of it, but not too far. So these are definitely tough situations for handicappers, especially pace guys like myself.
Yeah, and I think this race is actually a great example of that no speed scenario because there are no frontrunners in this race. It's not a situation where any of these horses have proven to be successful being up on the lead. So we don't even really know if it's a positive that a horse like Princessa Carolina is going to would be on the lead potentially, or Cambier Park. We just haven't really seen how they'd react to those situations. So maybe it's not an advantage being on the lead. And I think, as you were saying, that's why we made that change to the pace projector. What do you make of Cambier Park? Do you think she's the horse to beat in this race, or do you think it's just totally wide open?
I wouldn't say it's totally wide open. I think it's going to come down to the Chad Brown horses and Castle Lady, who's shipping in from England, where she's actually a Group 1 winner. She won a Group 3, then she won a Group 1 over there at Longchamp. I won't even try to pronounce the name. But she has been off since June, but I think you got to respect her. They're bringing her over here for this spot. She's got good time form figures. She is getting first-time Lasix, which is something I usually like to see in the Euro shippers. But even if she wasn't in this field, I would probably take a shot against Cambier Park with Regal Glory, the outside horse. I really liked her last race where she was able to overcome a pretty slow pace that day. It's proven to be a pretty strong race. The horses that finished 3rd, 4th, and 6th that day came back to run 1, 2, 3. In the Pebbles next time out with good numbers. So she's probably going to be the way I lean. maybe her and Castle Lady. Just got to see how the tote board's going to play out. And I don't have any real knocks on Cambier Park. Just not sure that she's really deserving of, the 7-5 or 8-5 that she'll probably be in here.
Yeah, I really thought there were about 6 main candidates in this race. I could kind of throw out Lady Prancelot, Kelsey's Cross, and Princessa Carolina. They just don't really interest me in this spot. But the other 6, I think, are pretty well matched. As you were saying, Cambier Park, I guess she's the horse to beat. I didn't think she had some huge speed figure advantage over this field that would justify her being under 2-1. And in these races, sometimes with a Chad Brown horse that looks pretty good, they tend to go overboard in the wagering. So I don't want her if she's a significant favorite in this race. I didn't know what to do with the European runners. Castle Lady, I watched her early races. She's not that impressive. That French 1,000 guineas that she won back in May, that really hasn't proven to be the strongest field. And I think she was exposed next time out when she stepped up against Group 1 company in the Coronation. Now, Group 1 form overseas is probably a little bit better than Group 1 form in the US. So maybe that form does translate well, but it's not like her time form ratings really make her that formidable in this race. And I didn't really prefer her that much over Magnetic Charm, who, when you look at her time form ratings, she's actually rated a little bit higher in some starts than Castle Lady is. And they both have to get the 1.125 distance, but Magnetic Charm is closing it pretty well, going this 1.125 distance in the Canadian last time against a good older horse in Starship Jubilee, who we'll talk about later. So I would use Magnetic Charm. I think she's a horse that's going to be a price in this race. My top pick would probably be Cafe Americano, one of Chad Brown's other horses. I just think the 1.125 is the right distance for her. I was really impressed with her turn of foot that she showed last time in the pucker up. That was not a strong field, but she just dominated that race. She really won a lot easier than that 2.25 length margin would indicate. And we'll see about the trips. As we were saying before, it's just a guess as to who's going to be up close to that pace or who's going to be coming from out of it and who's going to adapt well to the situation. But I just think Cafe Americano still has upside, and I've just seen enough of a lot of players in this race.
Yeah, I'm with you. And my only real knock on Magnetic Charm is I didn't like that at Woodbine last time. The pace was really slow, and she was still pretty far back. As a matter of fact, I think she was last at one point, and she really wasn't making up any ground on the winner. But that was against older Starship Jubilees, a solid enough mare who we're going to talk about a little later on because she's running at Woodbine. So at the price, I wouldn't have any problem using her in horizontal, bets if you want to go for a price. But just not a big fan of hers in here. No knocks on Cafe Americano. Like I said, I do worry about the pace a little bit, but then again, that's what that no speed thing is saying. It's saying to us, it may not matter.
Yeah, and I agree with you about Regal Glory. I think that Lake Placid, as odd of a race as it was, it has come back as a pretty strong event. I even think you could upgrade Varenka coming out of that race because she was in that dead heat with Regal Glory, and she was closing from even farther behind into that slow pace. So I think they both make a lot of sense, and they just get tested for class here. But I could see them taking that step forward. But like I said, this is just, if this were a multi-race sequence we were talking about, I'd say this was a spread race for me. Let's move on to the Woodbine Stakes, and we'll just go in chronological order, beginning with the New Arctic, the 7th race on the card. Not the strongest field, but I think an intriguing field with runners coming in from all different directions, some synthetic horses trying the turf, some horses who have done well going longer, turning back. Blind Ambition's the favorite on the morning line. This horse had been a pretty good turf sprinter for Todd Pletcher going back to last year. He made his first start off a long layout for Mark Cassidy last time. I wasn't thrilled with the effort personally. I think he's got to take a big step forward in this race, and I didn't really want him as the favorite if he's going to be the favorite in this spot.
No, I don't either. I mean, I'm not saying he's without chance here because I do think he's a contender, but this is actually a race I picked for out of the gate. Pickings were pretty slim this week for the pace projector segment. And this is one we have projected with having a fast pace. And there is plenty of speed in here. We got a couple horses listed as leaders, which means they just want the lead almost always. We have another speed horse, a few trackers. So I really didn't have an argument with that. And some of the speed I don't really consider too much contenders. Yorkton, he's okay, but he just seems to not want to go this far at this class. He's a little better maybe on synthetic against weaker competition. He got I guess you could say, kind of a lucky win when the horse whose name I forget, Pink Lloyd, had some problems and wound up being DQ'd. He kind of fell into that win. So I expect him to set the pace, but I don't consider him even a contender at 3-1. Same for some of the other speeds in here. So I kind of went looking for closers, and I wound up landing on Woody Creek, the 3-year-old filly that's shipping in from overseas, England and Ireland, where most of her races have been. I was a little put off at first when I saw that 98 time form rating last time, but I went and watched the replay. I read the time form comments, and it seems like it's just a complete throwout for her. So I'm going to ignore that race. I love the post for her. She should get a nice run on the outer Woodbine course, which I think will favor her style. And should be a good price. I'm going to key my wagers around her.
Well, we agree in this one because I landed on the same horse. Woody Creek. I actually went back and watched her last two races. I was really impressed with that race two back, that Phoenix Sprint Stakes. She was facing some pretty good horses that day. I mean, Gordon Lord Byron, who was third. I mean, if you watch a lot of the Group 1 racing over in Europe, we've seen his name pop up a few times. And she was really closing well at the end of that race. It really looked like she was going to win it at the Curragh. And then she just sort of got a little bit tired in the soft ground at the very end. And as you were alluding to, that trouble line last time, the field was strung out across the track, and it looked like the horses on one side really had the advantage, and she got held up in traffic behind the horses that were moving much slower in the late going on the other side. And once she extricated herself, she was really closing well at the end of that race. It's funny, she was not a very good horse when the season began, but she's really come to hand at the end of this year as a 3-year-old. And I was looking up this trainer, James Stack, coming over to North America over the past 5 years. He's brought 4 runners, and he's won with 2 of them. So he can certainly win in the U.S. And I agree with you. I think she's going to get the right pace situation, and we saw that she can close in those European races. The other horse that I would give a little bit of a look to is the number 1, Admiralty Pier. He was cooked in that hot pace in the Woodbine Mile last time. I don't know if he's a true sprinting type, but that effort 3 back behind Silent Poet when he had a little bit of trouble, that gives him a chance. And I'm just not thrilled with some of the others, and I thought maybe he could get a good trip from off the pace this time.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. He should get a great trip at the rail. I imagine as long as he breaks well, he's going to save ground behind the speed, and usually don't have much trouble getting out. The stretch is pretty long on that Woodbine course, so you often see horses wait till almost inside the furlong pole to tip out and make their move. So I wouldn't have any problem with him. He's one of the ones I'm going to use with Woody Creek and see how it goes. The one thing I did like, and you mentioned, is Woody Creek. She wasn't much earlier in the year, but we've talked about it with 3-year-olds, and especially the fillies this year. They can get good and get good in a hurry, and to me, it looks like she's on that path.
Well, let's move on to the EP Taylor for the fillies and mares, going the 1.25 miles on that outer turf course at Woodbine. And this race it was pretty confusing for me. A lot of European shippers, actually so many that there's not even a pace projector for this race because we just can't project a race that features mostly horses that haven't run in the US or in Canada. And the morning line favorite is Red Tea, one of those European shippers. She's coming over for Joseph O'Brien, and she's really just turned her form around since the trainer switched to him this season. She was more of a handicap type going back to last year, but in his barn recently, she's run her top time form numbers, and she even earned a Group 1 placing last time in that Prix Jean Romanet. What I will say is, I'm not sure how strong that race that she won at the Curragh 2-back was, that 5-horse Group 2 field. I watched that race, and the horses behind her, I just don't think they're very good. Certainly not good enough to justify a Group 2 rating. And last time she did run pretty well, but that was very soft ground. And I just kind of wonder how that form is going to translate to a firmer course at Woodbine. I get it that she's the horse to beat, and the others are just kind of a little bit, it's a confusing group to sort through. I just didn't want a short price on anybody in this race. The other horse I think you have to talk about is Starship Jubilee, who's going to take money. The question with Starship Jubilee, obviously, is the 1.25 mile distance, because she was so good in the Canadian last time, but there was no pace in that race, and she was able to just sprint home going the 1.1 miles. I think the 1.25 miles is a bit more of a stretch for her, but even though we're not showing a pace projector, I think it's likely that she's going to have another favorable trip up towards the front.
I do as well. I'm kind of with you on Red Tea. I watched some of her replays. I wasn't blown away. I looked up the records of some of the others, and she at 3-1 on the morning line. She's not a horse that would interest me very much. We've talked about this group a few times, Starship Jubilee, Holy Helena, and kind of the same thing with them. I'm just not blown away. The other Europeans are 3-year-olds. They don't have particularly good time form ratings. Sometimes they'll jump up, but they're all kind of short prices on the line other than the 9 horse, who is 20-1 for some reason. Didn't really impress me. So the way I'm kind of leaning in here is going with the 10 Secret Message for Graham Motion. He's already shipped up here once to beat Starship Jubilee. It was at just a mile, so you have to question the distance just a little bit. But she looks like a horse that could get it to me with a running style, and when she gets a nice setup. Not sure she'll get it here, but I'm not sure she's going to need it because I think she'll probably be in mid-pack, not too far off of a slow pace. And I'm hoping at that 10-1 price, I get a good run out of her.
Yeah, I've got no knocks on Secret Message. I had considered putting her on top if we're making ordinal selections. I think she's a major contender in this race. Her last effort does bother me a little bit because I expected a lot more out of her in that Boston Spa. I thought that was a good spot for her from a class standpoint, and she just didn't produce her usual late kick in the stretch. That's a little bit of a concern for me. But she did have legitimate trouble in the Diana before that, and her form is very good, as you mentioned, up at Woodbine previously. So I think she's a logical contender, and I don't think she's going to have a whole lot of trouble stretching out to the 1.25 mile distance. There were other horses I just didn't know what to do with in this race. I mean, I liked CKS Buena's races early in the year, but this is a pretty ambitious spot off a long layoff for Grab Motion, and she'll get the distance. I just didn't totally trust her. I'll use her probably defensively. The other Euros that you were mentioning, most of them I just don't think are good enough. Like you, I was a little surprised at some of the morning lines on these horses. I thought they all looked pretty closely matched to me. And for that reason, the one that I think would be most interesting to me and the one that I might take a shot with is Platon. I know her form looks not so great recently, but she was actually in a decent race last time in that Prix de la Nonette. The 105 time form rating for that effort is okay. She just didn't quite go on over the soft ground at the end of that race, but she was coming off a minor layoff. Her effort in that Prix Ventoux going back to April was actually pretty good. She beat a future Group 3 winner at Toile in that race, and she came back right out of that. It was actually 5-1 in that Prix Saint-Hilaire, where Imperial Charm, who's also in this race, was actually twice the price in that spot. Now, she obviously ran well in that race, whereas Platon did not. But she stumbled badly at the start. I just thought had some minor excuses. She was up on the pace in the French Oaks 2-back. That's not where you want it to be. We actually saw that Nicholas Clement horse, Wonderment, who had a very similar trip and a similar finishing position to Platon in that race, come back and nearly win the Jockey Club Oaks last a couple weeks ago at Belmont. So I feel like her form might be a little bit better than it seems. I know that these connections brought over another horse that they're running in the Canadian International, and she's probably just keeping that horse company on the trip. But I thought she'd be a price in this race and just looked okay in a race where I was having trouble really latching on to anybody at shorter prices.
Yeah, I have no problem with her, especially at that 20-1. Kind of odd we didn't mention Holy Helena at 5. She's a solid enough horse. She's proven to get the distance, but I think she's not quite the same mare that she was a year or even two, especially 2 years ago. So just kind of the house horse there, the home horse. I'm sure she'll be bet more than that 10-1 morning line, which is kind of what steered me away from her.
Yeah, she's another one that I had some difficulty making up my mind about because I do think the 1.25 mile distance is really perfect for her. The other thing about her is she never runs that well if her ground was given it, and we'll see how it comes up at Woodbine this weekend, but she really does prefer firmer courses, so that might help her if it's firm up there, but I don't know. She's never been my favorite horse, and I think she'd have to improve a little bit to beat this field, but I guess it's not out of the question. Let's head over to the Canadian International, the feature race at Woodbine on Saturday. A pretty compact field. Again, a very strong European flavor to the race. Last year's winner, Desert Encounter, is back in the race, coming off a 3-race win streak, actually, in England. But he's not the favorite on the morning line. That designation goes to Zayad, who's coming over from France. This is the stablemate, actually, of the horse that Longshot I was talking about in the EP Taylor. His form has been great. He won that Group 2 last time, coming out of the Group 1 placing prior to that. Time form ratings are really solid. He beat a horse that actually ran in the Arc last week in his prior start. So I don't really have a whole lot of knocks on him. I just think he looks like a pretty classy Euro.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. This is another race where we have a no pace label, but kind of taking that one with a grain of salt. We have 4 Euros in here. I think it's the 4 obviously ran here last year, Desert Encounter, when he won. So he does have some pace ratings, but it's at 1.5 miles in a small field. I don't expect a whole lot of pace, but I don't think it's going to matter much. I have to dismiss the couple local horses, Pumpkin Rumble and Nessie. We've talked about Nessie on here before. I actually think that's a horse who would be better served by shorter distances. I think we talked about that earlier in the year, but they keep throwing him in these longer races, and he runs okay, but not one I'm really leaning to. I didn't see a whole lot of value in this race, but if there is going to be any, it would probably be with the 2-horse Pivuin. I don't know how to say it. I'll just call him the 2-horse from here on out. You would think, having lived in Belgium for 5 years, I would be better at these pronunciations overseas, but I'm not. But yeah, he's a horse who he had some real trouble last time. This is a one where the time form comments really come in handy. If you read Desert Encounters, they basically said he had a dream trip, and the 2-horse did not. So I'm looking at 10-1. Maybe he can reverse the tables. He did run here in the Arlington Million back in August, but given the pace that day, and I thought he ran okay, but he didn't have much chance. It was just okay. He was wide. There wasn't a whole lot of pace in the race. He was in against better horses and Bricks and Mortar and Magic Wand, which he's not facing that kind here. So I may try to get him into exotics with either the 1 Zayad or the 4 Desert Encounter.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that horse. I don't know how to pronounce his name either. You're the more worldly one than I am. But the 2-horse, it's funny watching that last race because Jamie Spencer on Desert Encounter was really trying to keep him in through the stretch. And once this horse got out, he was closing down Desert Encounter at the end of that race, although it seemed like Jamie Spencer was really easing up Desert Encounter in the final stride. So maybe that had something to do with it. It could have been a bit of an optical illusion. He might be good enough. We'll see. They all are pretty closely matched, I think, in terms of their time form ratings. I thought Desert Encounter looked pretty good coming back for this race. At least you know that he runs well in the U.S., or rather in the North America. This race is up in Canada. And it seems like he's arguably coming into this race in better form than he was when he came over for the Canadian International last year. This might be a slightly tougher field with the other Euros in the race, but I don't really know about that. And I just think he's a horse that's pretty solid. And his trainer, David Simcock, when you look up his record, he does very well bringing horses over to North America. He just did that with Spanish Mission, the winner of the Jockey Club Derby at Belmont. He's won this race a number of times in the past, the Canadian International. So I just think Desert Encounter makes a lot of sense. He's a closer. He tends to not break well in his races, but I'm hoping that's not really a big deal, given that there's only 5 rivals in this race. So I'm not anticipating he's going to really work out a lot of trouble. I just think that all these horses should have a fair shot, and he might be the best of them, though it's pretty close between him and the 1.
Yeah, it's hard to say with a race like this if there will be any value on any of these horses. So just got to kind of monitor the tote and see if anything sends a green light.
Yeah, if I was playing like multi-race sequences at Woodbine on Saturday, which might be the route that I'd go, I'd probably lean on those 2 Euros with a little bit of the one you mentioned as sort of a B or a C in that kind of wager, and really spread more in the other races, particularly the EP Taylor, and maybe we could get that long shot home, that Euro in the New Arctic. That might be the strategy I'd go for, but I agree with you about the Canadian International, just not the most fascinating wagering race from a horizontal perspective. Let's head over to Belmont. Couple of interesting turf stakes races there. Actually, all these races we're talking about this weekend are on the turf. And the Sands Point is the feature. It's a grade 2 event, not really a grade 2 field, because a lot of these horses, it's kind of like the consolation prize because they're not going to go over to the Queen Elizabeth at Keeneland. And most of them are seeking some class relief after running in those turf triple series at Belmont and Saratoga. hard to know exactly how they're going to bet this race. I guess New and Improved is the one they might settle on because she's the Chad Brown runner with upside, but she's got to improve a little bit to beat this field, don't you think?
Yeah, that's the first note I made on this. I'm just not in love with this race either. Hate to be Debbie Downer, but just not a race I see a lot of value in. I was looking at Dinah Passer. I think it's just too short for her at 7-2 on the morning line, which I think is probably right in the ballpark. I don't think she offers any value. Could say the same for New and Improved, who looks like she could improve, but I don't know that you want to take a short price on a horse that definitely has to make a few steps up. I know she had some trouble last time, but she hasn't run particularly fast in either of her races. So I guess if you forced me to pick somebody, I might lean towards Feel Glorious, but that would depend on the tote board. And that's just because she's coming out of that Pebbles that we talked about. She looks to be improving a little bit, but again, I'm not in love with anybody in here.
Yeah, I had a lot of trouble making a pick in this race. I found it to be very confusing. I was just bouncing back and forth and to and from all different horses, considering them. Uh, Feel Glorious. Personally, my view on her is that she wants shorter distances, not longer. So I don't love her going the mile and an eighth, but she certainly has run fast enough to be competitive in this at this level, whereas some others haven't. Um, I kind of do feel like New and Improved might eventually be the best of this group, but I don't want to bet a favorite that hasn't yet run fast enough to win this race. I think she's dangerous. I'm just not in love with her from a win wagering perspective. Super Escape is a tough call for me because she's got that last race that would make her pretty tough here. It's just that was on a synthetic course, and it's possible that she's just improving late in her 3-year-old season because she's shown an affinity for turf in the past. It's just her turf races that she has run, they don't really make her good enough to beat this field. And you just wonder why she improved last time. Was it because of the synth or was it because of her just getting good now? I don't really know. Um, I have similar feelings to you about Dinah Passer as well as Romantic Pursuit, who really improved with the distance in their last couple of starts. So just sort of by process of elimination, I ended up taking another strong look at Olendone for Chad Brown, the other Chad horse in this race, who's probably going to be a bigger price than her stablemate. Originally, I wasn't even considering this filly because I just haven't been impressed with either for US starts. But I will say the Belmont Oaks, it's hard to put a positive spin on. She didn't run that day. I don't know what happened. But her first start for Chad Brown last time in that Saratoga Oaks, I know she finished last. They probably made a mistake putting the blinkers on because when you watch the early portions of that race, she was just extremely rank, fighting Irad Ortiz, was throwing her head about. And in a race where you really have to sprint to the wire and they're going so slow up front, I mean, you can't be expending energy fighting the rider, just not going to have that sprint at the end of the race. And she was actually trying to fight it out in the stretch, but she took a really hard bump at about the eighth pole and sort of lost her action briefly. And just nothing went right for her in that Saratoga Oaks. She actually ran a reasonably competitive speed figure that day with all of that trouble. There's no concrete rose in the race this time, and she is getting that class relief. They're taking the blinkers off, so I'm hoping that she settles well again. And if you're willing to believe that Belmont Oaks was just an aberration, she's got multiple races that make her a contender here, and she's a Chad Brown horse who's going to be a decent price. So even though she's never been my favorite, I just think maybe this could be the right spot for Olendone.
Well, you know me, I'll never turn my nose at the other Chad Brown, as I like to say. They often connect at prices that you don't see in the PPs. So let's move on and wrap it up with the Floral Park 6 furlong, $100,000 turf race at Belmont for 3-year-old and up fillies and mares.
And I did see that the likely favorite Goldwood scratched out of that stakes at Keeneland today. So I'm assuming that she's running in this Floral Park because she was cross-entered in both of these races. Goldwood, I mean, she was just a sensation at Monmouth Park this summer. She reeled off 4 stakes wins there, then went to Laurel and won the Sensible Lady. Are you concerned about these 5 and 5.5 furlong specialists stretching out to the 6 furlongs at a place like Belmont Park? Or do you think it doesn't matter that much?
No, I definitely do. I think we talked about that with Shecky Shabazz last week. I am not a fan at all of these horses that stretch out, going from shorter distances and smaller courses with tighter turns. Coming to Belmont, they just don't have a very good history, and particularly at a low price, I'm almost always going to be against them, and I'm certainly going to be against Goldwood here.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm a little skeptical of these horses transferring their form. She obviously is a lot better now than she was in the past. I know she ran at Belmont once before, but that was before she had really gotten good. Uh, I just don't think she's got any kind of major speed figure edge over this field. And if she regresses at all going the 6 furlongs, she's going to be in trouble in this race at a short price. And personally, I don't see why Fire Key is any worse than her. And we know Fire Key loves this 6 furlong distance. I mean, she's been in the exact and 10 of 11 starts going this trip. I know she got beaten by Goldwood and the Sensible Lady last time, but she was getting to her at the end. And Fire Key is just an admirable sort. She always runs well. She's got this really versatile running style where she can be up close or coming from off the pace. In my opinion, Fire Key is actually kind of the horse to beat in this spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. If I'm going to play multis in this race, I'm probably going to single her. I'm not in love with anyone else. I guess you could make an argument for Mamanu, maybe a couple others in here, but I think she really has an edge. Just she loves the distance. She's right there with speed figures. She's proven she can run inside. She doesn't have any problem with that. She's had some tough trips last time. She did lose a lot of ground last time, so she's really going to be the horse I'd lean on.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that. I really respect her. Mamanu, I think, might be a little bit dangerous, but she's going to have Goldwood breathing down her neck in this race, unlike last time when they sort of left her alone in that caress. So I respect Mamanu, but I'm not in love with her in this spot, especially stretching out to the 6 furlongs. I did this race and out of the gate. I love Fear No Evil. She's one of my favorite horses, and I know she's faced Fire Key a bunch of times. And I don't think she's ever beaten Fire Key, although the decisions have been close on a number of occasions. I maintain that Fear No Evil is just as good as Fire Key, and she's just been really unlucky. That was definitely the case last time when she was towards the back of the pack in that Sensible Lady and just encountered so much trouble coming around the far turn. She was shuffled back. Then coming into the stretch, this is the kind of horse that needs to get a clear run to build up momentum. And she had to alter course. She was steadied inside, had to come outside late. Just nothing went right for her last time. Prior to that, her form had actually been okay. She was getting to Goldwood at the end of that race too back at Monmouth, even though 5.5 is probably a little bit short for Fear No Evil. And if you go to the Floral Park last year, I know they finished 3/4 of a length apart. I actually thought Fear No Evil ran the better race because she made an early move into that race, and Fire Key was able to just sort of close her down at the end after making that last move. And the thing about Fear No Evil that I love in this spot is that she strikes me as the kind of horse that is really going to benefit from this rider switch to Joel Rosario. He just seems to fit horses like this so well, ones that need to be covered up early, need to wait, and then make that late run in the stretch. He just has this knack for getting them into the clear at the right time and producing that late kick. So I'm hoping that Fear No Evil, a mare who's gotten some questionable rides at a few points in her career, gets the right ride on Saturday and can upset this field at a price. But I know she's got to have everything go perfectly.
Yeah, I can see Fear No Evil at the price on the morning line, which you make. So I assume it's a pretty good one. I know you do very good at that. Again, my only real problem is she's coming from those shorter distances at smaller tracks, but at least she's not a speed horse. She's a horse that makes up ground. So no real knocks on her. Just my main knock on here is Goldwood. I do like Fire Key, and I could use Fear No Evil and vertical bets.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason that I was really highlighting this race is because I think when people look at it at first glance, it might seem pretty simple with Goldwood just having dominated these races. But I think once you dig into the form a little bit, these 4 horses are a little bit more evenly matched than it might seem when you just initially look at the recent records. So we pretty much agree on this one. I think Fire Key is going to be tough, but I'm going to go with Fear No Evil at a little bit of a price. That's all the racing for this week, all that turf racing that we covered. I think the stakes will probably slow down a little bit over the next couple of weeks. We'll see what we're going to do with this show. I think at some point we'll want to do some Breeders' Cup prep and some previews of those races, probably not all packed into that Breeders' Cup Friday. So we'll plan those out and lay those out probably on the future TimeformUS Pacecast. But Craig, thanks for discussing the races this week. Hopefully we have a little bit of luck. We didn't do quite as well last week, not as good as 2 weeks ago, but hopefully we stumbled upon a couple of good prices on the show this week. As always, you can listen to the TimeformUS Forecast and the TimeformUS Pacecast on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form. So guys, thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back on Tuesday with a Timeform US Pacecast.